Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really fascinating question. How do we actually study something that is, by its very nature, deeply personal? We're going to explore two powerful and really different ways of looking at human experience.
I mean, just think about it for a second. How can you possibly build a scientific framework around something as subjective and messy as grief, or joy, or falling in love? It feels like it should be impossible, right? Well, this is a challenge that researchers and philosophers have been wrestling with for a long, long time.
And the answer, or at least a big part of it, lies in a field called phenomenology. Yeah, I know, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. It's the formal study of our lived conscious experiences. It's not just interested in what happened, but what it felt like for the person it was happening to.
Okay, so how does this whole phenomenology thing actually work in practice? Well, it basically splits into two major schools of thought. And probably the easiest way to get your head around them is to imagine you have two different camera lenses. Both are pointed at the exact same thing, human experience, but each one is going to give you a completely different kind of picture. All right, let's look through our first lens. We'll call this one the purist view. The official name is Transcendental Phenomenology, and its pioneer was a philosopher named Edmund Husserl. And his big goal? He wanted to make the study of experience as rigorous and objective as any hard science.
And the core idea here is honestly pretty wild. Husserl believed that underneath all of our individual quirks and different stories, there's a fundamental, universal essence to every single experience. So the whole point of this approach is to peel back all those layers and find the core building blocks that are true for absolutely everyone.
So, how in the world do you find that pure essence? Well, the key method is this really interesting concept called bracketing. The idea is that the researcher has to act like a scientist in a sterile lab. They have to consciously identify all their own personal feelings, their biases, their theories, and then they have to literally put them in a mental box, seal it up, and set it aside.
And the process for getting to this essence is super structured, very step-by-step. It's the systematic journey. You start by collecting really detailed descriptions from people. Then you do that all-important bracketing step. From there, you pull out the most important statements. And finally, you synthesize all of it down to reveal that one shared, universal meaning, the essence.
So let's bring this back to our example of grief. A researcher using this lens, they're not really interested in why you're grieving or the specific details of your story. Nope. They are hunting for the elements that are common to all grief, that deep core sense of loss, the shared ache of emotional pain, and that universal feeling of longing for what's gone.
Okay, so now let's switch out that lens for something completely different. This is the interpreter's view. It's often called Interpretive Phenomenological Analysis, or IPA for short, and it was heavily influenced by another philosopher, Martin Heidegger.
Now, this approach starts from a completely different planet, almost. It basically argues that the whole idea of bracketing your biases is a fantasy. It says complete objectivity isn't just impossible, it's not even the point. This view suggests that the researcher's own background and their perspective, those aren't problems you need to get rid of. They're actually valuable tools for doing the analysis.
So instead of that straight, linear process we saw before, this lens uses something called the hermeneutic circle. It's this constant dance, this back-and-forth process. The researcher will read one little detail, then zoom out to consider the whole story. Then they'll go back to that detail with a new understanding, then back out to the whole story again, cycling over and over to build a much richer, deeper interpretation. So you can see the whole process here feels way more organic, right? It all starts with just total immersion in what people have said, reading and rereading. And you're not just pulling out themes like you're mining for data. No, the themes sort of emerge from that interplay between the story and the researcher's interpretation. The final product isn't some single universal truth, but a rich, personal, and context-heavy interpretation.
And when we look at grief through this lens, we're asking a totally different set of questions. The focus shifts entirely to what makes a person's experience unique. How does your culture shape the way you grieve? How do your religious beliefs change your interpretation of loss? How does your unique personal history make your grief different from anyone else's in the world?
All right, we've looked through both lenses. We have the purist who's searching for that universal truth, and we have the interpreter who's searching for individual meaning. Now let's do the big side-by-side. This is where it all clicks. Here's where you can really see the split. First up, the goal. The purist lens is all about finding that universal essence. But for the interpreter, it's about understanding individual meaning. And that completely changes the researcher's role, right? You go from being a detached, objective observer to being an active interpreter. It all comes down to a core philosophy. One side thinks pure objectivity is possible, the other says, no way, subjectivity is just part of the deal. And so the outcome is totally different. You get a pure description on one side and a rich, context-heavy story on the other.
So, you might be asking, okay, which one is right? And the thing is, that's kind of the wrong question. Both of these perspectives matter a whole lot because they're trying to do two fundamentally different things, and both of them give us really valuable insights into what it means to be human.
Look, it really just boils down to this. Are you more interested in the universal truths or the personal meanings? The purist's lens, that transcendental approach, it gives us the common fundamental building blocks of what it's like to go through something. But the interpreter's lens, that gives us the beautiful, complicated, and totally unique personal story behind it all.
And maybe the punchiest, clearest way to say it is this. One approach seeks to describe the experience. The other seeks to understand an experience. That one little word, it changes everything.
And that kind of brings me to a final question for you. When you reflect on your own life, your own successes and struggles, which lens do you find yourself using to make sense of it all? Are you a purist, always looking for those fundamental truths and the essential lessons? Or are you an interpreter, diving into the rich, unique, personal meaning that's woven into the fabric of your own story?